I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Sophie Lee-Williams, founder of Eagle Restoration Wales, did her PhD at Cardiff, which was also about white-tailed eagles, and she now works with the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust as a project officer for the reintroduction scheme that she's going to be talking about. We're really privileged and grateful to Sophie Lee for joining us tonight, and I am absolutely convinced you'll find what she has to say really interesting. But please, if you've got a question, put it in the chat, and we'll have time at the end to hear those and hear what Sophie Lee's got to say. So, Sophie Lee, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Dave. Just bear with me when I share my screen because I'm not very technology snazzy either. So bear with me when I just get the presentation up and running. But thank you, Dave, Lauren and Emily for helping to facilitate this talk tonight. I'm really happy to be here, and obviously the Vale of Glamorgan is at the moment within our area that we've anchored down. So I'm hoping that you can see my screen, and obviously, like Dave said, I am the founder of Eagle Reintroduction Wales, and I'm here today to talk to you about our White-tailed Eagle programme, which is a partnership between Durrell Wildlife and also Gwent Wildlife Trust, where we've now anchored down to restore white-tailed seagulls in South East Wales and the Severn Estuary. And well, we've been funded now by the Ecological Restoration Fund up until 2025. So we've got 2 years of funding and a release site. So I'm very, very excited to deliver this news. So just hopefully tonight you will leave this talk knowing a little bit more about how we've got the ball rolling with white-tailed eagle reintroductions. So if any of you have kind of not or don't know about Eagle Reintroduction Wales, just zap through some quick project history. So the project was founded in 2016 after I ventured up to Scotland and worked with both eagle species. And being Welsh and from the valleys, if you haven't noticed from my accent yet, I was only used to breeding peregrines and the odd kestrel jotting around now and again. So working up in Scotland as a teenager to see the complete set of our raptor species, I kind of felt deprived as a child. So when I come back, committed to designing feasibility studies to restore or to assess whether it was feasible to restore both golden and white-tailed eagles. And 4 years PhD with Cardiff University, Welsh Government funding, we had all of the answers that we needed in regards to white-tailed eagles being an extremely compatible species for Wales, but golden eagles being a slightly challenging species, and the Welsh upland landscape is not quite ready for that yet. So from this PhD, got offered a job, an absolutely dream job with Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, where we basically have very much turned from a research programme into making this an active conservation programme. So as of 2021, our white-tailed eagle programme is now a conservation programme in planning. So our main aim after 7 years of research is now to restore a small breeding population of white-tailed eagles in southeast Wales, now that we know that it's a compatible landscape and an optimal area. And we're doing this with an absolutely amazing partnership with Gwent Wildlife Trust, and we're also in talks with WWT Slimbridge to bring them on board as a presence on the English side of the Bristol Channel, Severn Estuary, sorry, not Bristol Channel. So hopefully today we will go over how, why, what and where. How do we go about a reintroduction? Why are we considering one? What do we need to consider? And where will a reintroduction happen? But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the ERW project, it would be rude not to introduce you to our white-tailed sea eagle. And our white-tailed sea eagle is from the family of Acridae, which contains eagles, hawks and buzzards. And in lay terms, an eagle is just a large bird of prey which are active during the day. And our white-tailed eagle is part of the fish eagle family, and they are closely related to the American bald eagle, African fish eagle and Steller sea eagle, and all of these species are aquatic prey specialists. They have hooked bills and also hooks on the underneath of their feet. So they're all adapted to be aquatic prey specialists. Our white-tailed eagle is our largest UK bird of prey. So they weigh around, well, the females are bigger than the males. So they usually weigh about 6 to 7 kilograms, often much lower than that, but obviously can be up to that kind of weight. And they've got an 8-foot wingspan, so absolutely huge square wings. And the reason why they have these wings is they're often seen in low dwelling habitats. And they're a bird that actually likes to save energy. So these wings carry less weight per area of wing to help them do exactly that, reserve energy. So where would you likely see a white-tailed seagull? So as an aquatic prey specialist, they also are tied into aquatic landscapes. So you would mostly see them around shallow waters across coastlines, estuaries and wetlands, and also rivers and inland lakes. So marine and freshwater bodies they are tied into, and we'll often see these species foraging, but also it is the general rule of thumb for white-tailed eagles to breed within 3 kilometers of a water body. And their nest sites basically are large mature trees. Obviously, they would need large mature trees because they have large wingspans, but also across the likes of Scotland and Norway. They do like coastal crags as well, but mostly around about 80% of the population across Europe is correlated to large mature trees. So what about their diet? So white-tailed eagles across Europe, their diet mostly constitutes of fish and water birds. Now, this varies spatially and seasonally across Europe. So, for example, we say that fish for white-tailed eagles are mainly their staple diet in spring and summer when they're readily available. So fish go into torpid phase, stage in the winter when waters are cooler, so they're less readily available, especially because white-tailed eagles forage in shallow waters. So fish are a big part of their diet, up to 60% in some areas in spring and summer. And when fish then become less kind of abundant, they often switch to water birds. But water birds can be taken all year round. And as you can imagine, for the Severn estuary, the increase in winter birds is a huge prey base for white-tailed seagulls. They're also all year round scavengers. So unlike most eagles, like golden eagles, which would only resort to carrion in the winter when live prey is available, white-tailed eagles prefer carrion all year round. So they're more closely related to vultures and red kites in this matter. And also mammals to a secondary capacity. So for example, we found rabbits are really important in the first 2 or 3 years of a white-tailed eagle's life. Not every bird selects mammals, but some birds do, we found from the Isle of Wight. But they can also take the likes of young fox cubs and young boar across Europe as well. So mammals, but only at a secondary capacity. So how do we go about a reintroduction? So we can't just click our fingers and release white-tailed eagles free willy-nilly into the Welsh landscape. I wish it was the case, but obviously 7 years deep, that is not the case. So these programs are strict and highly regulated, and in regards to Wales and this program, NRW are the authority figure which gives us the final green lights to go ahead. So this is a licensed program, and these license applications are extremely comprehensive assessments, and they're all shaped around NRW and European IUCN reintroduction criteria. So very comprehensive. And over the last 7 years, we have, like I said, done national assessments for Wales. And now that we've anchored in, we're around about 80% complete of, of these license applications. We've now got our regional assessments left, which I'll come to a bit further on in the talk. But, like I said, we have got a great foundation of research in order to understand this is extremely feasible for the Welsh landscape. So why are we proposing a reintroduction in the kind of Severn Estuary, Southeast Wales, and we realised that, like I said, it is straddling the borders of England and Wales, and we didn't know whether this would be of benefit to the project or whether it would be not of benefit to the project. But speaking to obviously the experts we're working with, and now laying down the foundations of the project, reality here, we know that this has huge conservation justification for white-tailed eagles. It will have a Welsh importance, of course, by restoring a native lost species and the important ecosystem functions here in Wales. But this programme will also have a UK importance, because by restoring white-tailed seagulls in Southeast Wales in hope that they will disperse across not only the Welsh side, but obviously Southwest Wales, it would also help strengthen the white-tailed eagle population in southern Britain. Now, in my next slide, we'll go into the Isle of Wight reintroduction, but this would help the species action plan for the birds at an international level. And also the wider picture here, what we've learned from the Isle of Wight is that just by releasing 6 young birds down south in 2019 sparked international movement of young European eagles. We had 4 continental birds using Wales and England in 2019, and 1 was from Sweden. So we know that this would have European importance, increased metapopulation mixing and gene pool dynamics, which would have happened historically across Europe. This programme obviously also provides an opportunity to help us, not only regionally, but at a national level, to help restore our health and resilience to our aquatic landscapes. Now, white-tailed eagles breed in woodlands, but also use aquatic landscapes. So they use a broad array of habitats that they can bring these functions to. And, one of the not most obvious, but one of the most important ecosystem functions of a white-tailed seagull is to keep seasonal prey numbers in check. So with the most common fish species taken across Europe is the northern pike, for example. They are extremely abundant across these regions, so they could help keep those numbers. Common bream, even the likes of mallards and coots. So they can keep, like I said, abundant prey species down, which has further impacts or positive impacts on creating space and food for other biodiversity. We've also found that white-tailed eagles are not only good at balancing their prey, but their mere presence helps balance the food chain and control mesopredators. So when we're talking about aquatic landscapes, mesopredators we consider as gull species, cormorants, herons. Those are mesopredators, middle trophic predators. So that if we are able to control some of these abundant mesopredators, again would have top-bottom positive effects on the food chain. All year round scavengers, as I've already mentioned, which allows, like I said, significant energy to be transferred through the food chain. And like white-tailed eagles are top predators, so like I said, they're able to provide energy, and that's something that, like I said, we don't really have much of in Wales. And one thing that I love about white-tailed seagulls, and this is the only other bird of prey which I know does this in Wales, is the osprey, is important resource linkers between aquatic landscapes and woodlands. So white-tailed eagles, like an osprey, can have foraging spouts up to 10 kilometres. So like I said, foraging in aquatic landscapes and breeding in woodlands, nutrient recycling is really important and something that we can bring to South East Wales. So an amazing amount of ecosystem functions that would come with this species. And what we found from Europe and these reintroduction programs is they can provide wider benefits as well. So almost like the bald eagle in America, white-tailed eagles can be used as bioindicator species, so early warning signals for the like of disease, pollution and climate change. So it can really be used regionally and nationally as a management tool, especially something that we see of importance in the Wye-and-Usk. They're also iconic and charismatic birds. So in Scotland and the Isle of Wight, it draws public attention to these areas in order for us, regionally and collaboratively to promote, obviously, the conservation priorities in these regions. Another region with, another reason why this species would help South East Wales. And in a long time ahead, long-term goals here. But, these birds are highly protected. So special protected areas for roost sites and, nest sites. So we're able to provide extra sanctuary for biodiversity in due time when we know, where these birds are settling. So it begs the question, is this the most suitable option for the species? And what we found is quite significant. So we've found, because the current UK white-tailed eagle population is so fragmented, and we found that it would take 50 to 80 years for white-tailed eagles to naturally colonise Wales. And this is simply because of the biology of the species. So in the 1970s, white-tailed eagles were reintroduced to the Isle of Mull. Rhum, not Mull, Isle of Rhum in the 1970s. And over 50 years, a rolling scheme of reintroductions have helped restore 150 breeding pairs now in Scotland. It's taken 50 years to achieve that sort of population number. 15 years into a release scheme in Ireland, they've now got 15 pairs, 2 pairs on the east coast of Scotland after reintroduction in 2007. And as of, releasing birds in 2019, a more recent effort on the Isle of Wight has now established 1 breeding pair. So we know that because of the fragmented distribution of breeding populations, most of our breeding populations are too far north for them to naturally colonise Wales. And what we found is, with reintroduction programs, white-tailed eagles actually have something called natal philopatry. They imprint on their natal site. So when they reach sexual maturity at the age of 5, and most of them don't reach breeding age, then they breed in close proximity to birthplaces. So we know that population expansion is slow. So when we release young birds in the Welsh landscape, like I said, they will imprint and then hopefully come back to breed. And that is why white-tailed eagle restorations are so important across the UK and across Europe. And of course, you know, we wouldn't be able to restore species if they weren't native here before. And obviously, this was a huge knowledge gap for ERW at the start, because most of the white-tailed eagle research, which suggests that there was around 1,000 to 1,400 breeding pairs across the UK historically, had massive knowledge gaps for Wales. As you can see, there's not a lot of historic records. Well, we've now filled in those records. We found that the researchers Richard Evans and Derek Yaldin had a lack of understanding for the Welsh language. So we obviously filled in those, and it was the case now that we have records for white-tailed eagles across every county in Wales to suggest that they were widespread. And in regards to our southeast release, the nearest breeding record historically, and many of you will find this extremely interesting. The last breeding record down south for white-tailed eagles was actually in Kenfig Nature Reserve, which was known as Kenfig Burrows historically. And they were breeding up until the 1820s, which I think, like I said, is a fantastic piece of knowledge for anybody who's Welsh or from South Wales. So another consideration is, where would we get our source population from? So we are not able to take birds from a small population if it has a risk of that population decline in, you know, future years. That's something that we are, like I said, restricted by. So we have reviewed the breeding strongholds for white-tailed eagles across their current range, and as you can see, there's two breeding strongholds. It's probably safe to say we do not want to partner with Russia at the moment. So we are, like I said, leaning on our experts in Norway, which have been involved in these release schemes across the UK since, like I said, that very first release in 1975. And this comes to the fact that it's not a novel concept. We are working with experts across the globe and in the UK, and we have over 50 years of shared practices. And as you can see, the top left picture here, this is Roy Dennis releasing birds on the Isle of Rum, I think this is, in the 1970s, and this was one of the first release schemes. And as you can see, our protocols have advanced significantly since then, and this was our involvement in the release scheme on the Isle of Wight in 2021. But also just to say that we are now working with bald eagle experts as well, because they've released over 1,000 species in North America. And like I said, they are very much sister species of the European white-tailed seagull. So we have loads of experience behind our belt. So what do we need to consider? So is Southeast Wales suitable for white-tailed seagulls? And what we found is, yes, it is. We have found that the Severn Estuary has a carrying capacity of 38 pairs. So we have a lot of ancient woodland cover, a lot of shallow waters. It is an absolutely fantastic area for white-tailed seagulls. So anything in blue is not suitable. Anything other than blue is suitable, with reds being, like I said, highly suitable areas. So obviously this coastline is coming up as a significant contribution for this species. We've also had a look at the wider Bristol Channel. So this, just to focus on this orange buffer here, this orange buffer highlights the area where we're hoping to establish a breeding population. And obviously, the wider Bristol Channel then can, like I said, has got a carrying capacity of 36 pairs. So this coastline has an amazing ability to contribute to the conservation of this species across the UK. We've also had a look at the spatial distribution of nesting habitats. So that involves large mature trees, so coastal but also inland. And as you can see, the Severn Estuary has a lot of ancient woodland cover, mostly inland but always situated around coastal waters. And as you come wider across the Bristol Channel, plenty of large coastal trees for them to inhabit in due time as well. We've also done this for coastal cliffs. Probably safe to say that the Severn Estuary is not very craggy, but the wider Bristol Channel, there are areas where, like I said, you know, they would be able to swap and change between trees and coastal cliffs if they wish. We've also had a look at breeding displacement. So suitable habitat does not mean that it's it's available for white-tailed eagles to occupy today. So we've had a look at perils from people, anthropogenic risks, and we've also looked at the amount of historic habitat lost to these modern day land uses. And even with modern day land uses, the carrying capacity of the Severn Estuary is still 27 pairs, so that is brilliant, and the wider Bristol Channel 21 pairs. So all in all, we know from our evidence that South East Wales is best placed to restore a small breeding population of 6 to 10 pairs of white-tailed seagulls in a 10-year time frame. This then would allow us to create a sustainable population just to stand back and allow them to naturally expand on their own accord. So a very small scale restoration project on par with the Isle of Wight programme. So I just wanted to quickly run through some of our prey availability assessments just to highlight how comprehensive these assessments are. And obviously white-tailed eagles are extreme generalist species. Over 1,000 prey items have been found. For their size, they don't need a lot of food, only 500 to 600 grams a day. I always say to obviously the public at our public engagement events, I think, well, how can we portray this? And I always think, oh, well, a hamster's around about 150 grams. So let's say about 3 or 4 hamsters a day, and a white-tailed seagull is happy. And obviously obviously they are quite big species, but their prey weight is usually between 1 and 3 kilograms, but has a carrying capacity of 5 to 6 kilograms as well if you've got a bigger female. So we've also had a look at prey availability across Wales, and what these tables show is just the density of prey per 10 kilometres squared across obviously zones of Wales. And zone 1 is Southeast Wales. So I'm going to obviously zoom in on a bit of these prey composition. So we know just by looking at density data across Wales, but locally in Southeast Wales, that we have the right composition of prey for this programme to work, and for white-tailed eagles to be happy, basically. And if white-tailed eagles are happy, I'm happy. So we know that we've got a high density, and don't forget, this is not 879 geese in Southeast Wales. This is 879 geese, ducks and swans per 10 kilometres squared. So like I said, we've got high densities of ducks, geese and swans, high densities of cormorants and shags, rails, coots and crakes, probably mostly coots to be fair, this one, herons and bitterns, gulls and terns. I'm quite surprised that this is like lower than ducks and geese, but anyway, gulls and terns, mostly gulls. And obviously most of Wales shows this, but obviously corvidae are probably one of the biggest density groups of all of our analysis. Also grebes as well are quite a high densities across the Severn Estuary. And most of these, like I said, family orders, there are species in there which obviously are staple diets, but also, taken at a secondary capacity. But it just showcases, like I said, the right composition of prey. Also, when we look at mammals, there is, again, like I said, a good composition of mammals. across the Severn Estuary to cater for white-tailed eagles, because mammals are only taken at a secondary capacity. So where will a reintroduction happen? And it's coming now to obviously the conclusion of the talk. So I've been talking, obviously started saying that we, now anchored in South East Wales, and we were funded by the Monmouth Rural Development Programme last year, and Gwent Wildlife Trust have helped us, along with, like I said, over 25 environmental NGOs and private landowners. We visited over we visited over 68 sites now, but it says 62 on my presentation, across South East Wales, to look for a suitable release site. I can confirm we've now found a suitable release site within South East Wales. And, like I said, we're very excited that this, like I said, anchors us down for our regional assessments. So our regional assessments that we have left, and remember I said at the beginning, we're 80% complete and we've only got our regional assessments left. So our regional assessments are around the ecological feasibility of bringing eagles now to South East Wales, especially establishing a breeding population. And one of these assessments are around the risk to protected biodiversity. So what we're hoping to do is, like I said, conduct habitat regulatory assessments. So we've made a start on this already. We're obviously aiming to map all special designated areas across the Severn Estuary, but also the wider Bristol Channel. We've been told we don't have to do that, but we want to do it just to keep the feasibility study, like I said, as standard as possible. Assess prey abundance across these regions, identify species of conservation importance and their numbers, but also evaluate the risk to these species. And the way that we're doing that is reaching out to global experts that work with some of these species and have experience with white-tailed eagle interactions. So I'll give you an example of this. These are some of the bird species that we've gathered data for, and we've done it for fish, but also fish and migratory birds for the Severn Estuary are our main priority. But for the greater white-fronted goose, we've reached out to Greenland experts where white-tailed eagles actually breed in Greenland. So we've gone to the Greenland experts to understand the interaction in their breeding grounds. And obviously with greater white-fronted geese being such low numbers, and with them not being a staple diet in Greenland, we feel like there are more common geese species like Canada geese, greylag geese, that white-tailed eagles would take advantage of over coming across, obviously, a greater white-fronted geese. And like I said, that's kind of the level of research we're going into to provide to these authority figures and to provide to everybody else that this is not going to provide a massive impact on our protected species at all. Especially because, like I said, white-tailed eagles are extreme generalists and take the most seasonally abundant prey. So one of the other assessments we're doing is, like I said, an extensive social feasibility study. So we're launching a public raise awareness campaign, but also a consultation campaign working with key interest groups. So we've done, we facilitate white-tailed eagle talks like this one in particular, to local groups, and attach, a webinar with that for a question and answer session, to understand people's support, but also to understand people's concerns for us to shape this programme, to those kind of levels of concerns. And we're also hoping to release a public opinion survey early next year. And we're providing drop-in sessions locally, and like I said, working with on-site key visits and drop-in sessions for key interest groups as well. So plenty of opportunities to further get involved in the programme. next year. But just an example of the level of work that we've done this summer to prep for this consultation. We done a county tour really of all county shows in South and West, was from Southeast to West Wales, as far up as the Royal Welsh. And we took our ambassador white-tailed eagle with us from the British Birds of Prey Centre. So she was a 1-year-old bird. Very, you know, like I said, she will look very much like the birds that we'll release in the landscape. And obviously, we asked the general public, how do you feel about restoring white-tailed seagulls to Wales? In a voting poll system, and we had a great result, 88% support rate across Wales so far, and we had 3 general concerns generally around the misconceptions of a white-tailed seagull. We found that 84% of the public didn't even know what a white-tailed seagull was, so we need to fill that gap before we restore them. So the general concerns were risks to pets and children, not a huge concern at all, as white-tailed eagles are probably more scared of you and your children and vice versa. Risk to local wildlife, which obviously we're covering through our HRAs, and probably one of our biggest concerns across the public is the risk to livestock, and livestock is quite a broad key interest group, so it covers from fish to game birds to, like I said, sheep farming, poultry farming, and also puppy farms. So like I said, a very broad key interest group for livestock. So in conclusion, we believe that this programme is the most acceptable option for the species and for Wales. We know it will be of Welsh, UK and international importance for white-tailed eagles. We know there's an abundance of suitable habitat and resources here for them. We know they'll bring wider benefits to Wales via species and ecosystem restoration. An opportunity for us to take a stance towards healthier, creating healthier biodiversity and habitats. And one that I've not mentioned yet, but I do like to end on this one because it is a huge benefit the white-tailed eagles bring. And that is the economic benefit through increasing tourism and revenue. And this has been done by the Isle of Mull and the RSPB on the Isle of Mull. And what they've found is that white-tailed eagles alone bring £5 to £8 million of tourist spend every year to the Isle of Mull. It supports 110 jobs and provides £2.1 million to the local economy, supporting local communities and businesses. So this programme not only has an opportunity to help us with our environmental objectives, but also has is a species that would bring wider benefits to obviously a region. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll open up for questions. And also just to conclude, like I say, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But if you want to follow, kind of up on questions after, please get in contact with us through the Eagle Reintroduction Wales website or on social media. And I also wanted to finish by saying we've got our education and outreach officer with us today. And one thing that this is a new thing for the programme, and we are hoping to run, like I said, education and school programmes across South East Wales and general Wales. So if anybody wants to, I'll share Crystal King's email in the chat. Please reach out to us if you've got any ideas or if you want to learn more about our education and outreach programme for white-tailed eagles, but also nature recovery in Wales. So thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you, Sophie. That was a tour de force. Fantastic stuff. Brilliant. Yes, if you stop sharing, that will open up the screen. Thanks a million. I've seen a few white-tailed eagles in my time, and they are absolutely astonishingly spectacular birds. And I thought, oh, well, I kind of know everything about them, but I certainly didn't. So thank you very much for that. I also had a few questions that I started out with, but you answered them all. I think, Sophie, in future, you should perhaps leave a few things just hanging so that people know exactly got some questions to ask. But let's have a look, see if we haven't got any questions yet. But one of the things look, in Wales, while people are kind of thinking and perhaps writing out their questions, in Wales, we're quite used to raptor reintroductions in a sense. We had red kites, which was a fantastic success. We've seen ospreys coming in to Wales increasingly. What is the impact of white-tailed eagles alongside other raptors? How do they interact with ospreys, for example? I mean, recently in the last couple of months, we've have ospreys in the Vale on passage. How does that work? How do they interact?
It's a good question. Yes. So how we've done these assessments is looked at, like I said, the ecology of each species. So, for example, with ospreys, they and white-tailed eagles, they have very similar breeding habitats. So there would be competition over large mature trees. But they, like I said, in Scotland, they can breed side by side, and that's because they have very different foraging abilities. So an osprey, as many of you know, has a waterproof plumage, so they can submerge themselves underwater, which means that they have access to deep water fish. Whereas white-tailed eagles don't have the ability to submerge themselves under water. Number one, because they're a heavy body bird. And often we've known white-tailed eagles to drown in these circumstances. They don't have waterproof feathers, so they just, like I said, pluck fish from the surface of the water or forage in shallow waters. They have different forage niche, so that we don't feel like there would be an impact on ospreys directly, but we've found white-tailed eagles are extreme food pirates, and we've found that ospreys can be victim to this, particularly young inexperienced ospreys. So like I said, indirectly through stealing of food, but not in regards to directly through numbers. And with red kites, the ecology is very different. So they, like I said, there's plenty of free food in the landscape for all birds of prey. I think that's safe to say.
Well, and Andrew Briscombe has actually put a question that kind of follows on, particularly interested in peregrine falcons and other kind of birds that use the coast as their breeding site. Kestrels, obviously, etc. But peregrines is the one he mentions. And you said, Sophie, you started by talking about peregrines, so you've got some, personal affection for them. How do they interact, those species?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, like I said, on the coastlines we have, especially in West Wales, and I know that we've got breeding peregrines in the Wye Valley as well on the crags. And this has been a question that's come to me by the community and has brought up quite regular. And we can say that, like I said, those coastal crags in Southeast Wales wouldn't be large enough for white-tailed seagulls, but certainly in the West Coast and some of these coastal areas, white-tailed eagles would require large kinds of crags rather than small crags, where peregrines are quite small species, so they can have a secure nest while being quite close. We haven't experienced displacement by white-tailed seagulls and peregrines, but we have experienced displacement with peregrines and golden eagles, and I think that's because of the dietary overlap. So with white-tailed eagles, like I said, peregrines don't eat fish or water birds. Well, they do eat water birds actually, and they eat wading birds. But like I said, that extra level of diversity for white-tailed eagles, they're able to live side by side, and that's why I love working with white-tailed seagulls. They're not really a problematic species at all. They're very lazy for their size. They don't deserve the largest UK, they don't deserve the brand of the largest UK birds of prey. They're very lazy.
We haven't got any questions in. I do encourage people, if they've got a question, to pop it in. It doesn't need to be. Lauren, did you want to come in? I can see you put your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. So we have got a couple of questions in. If you go to the top toolbar next to chat, the Q&A, we've popped them in there, so hopefully you can see them. Would you like me to read them out?
Yes, please, Lauren.
It's
That'd be
not
great.
showing up. Yeah, brilliant. So let's have a look. We'll start from the bottom. We've got, I've got just one in from Carly actually. So with them being scavengers, have they been found to become victims as bycatch, going after fishing vessel catch, or would they not go out that far?
That's good. Yeah, that's a good question. So what we've done with the assessments is, like I said, what we've done we've looked at satellite tag evidence of so because they often use the littoral zone of coastlines, which is the shallow waters. We often find them to not really use kind of deep sea oceans, I suppose. So, like I said, they do have interactions with fishing vessels, but it would have to be a learned behaviour. But like I said, with commercial fishing in the Bristol Channel, you know, for the likes of, you know, white fish like cod, hake, we don't see it as a huge risk at all because, like I said, they're deep water rather than shallow water fishing. So there's not a high impact within the literature for them being, like I said, suffering within the bycatch for. Yeah, there's no. I'm just trying to think, but no, definitely, yeah, I don't think they would be a species that would be a high victim of that.
I presume, though, Sophie Lee, one of the great dangers, because they are carrion eaters, is those who perhaps, I mean, we've seen in the Isle of Wight's release difficulties engaging with particular stakeholders. You know, I'm thinking, I think it was in Dorset that there was a thing, and so you know, traps, poisons, etc. There will have to be quite a strong communication and partnership approach, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, we're working, like I said, this is the social side of our assessments are working with those key interest groups, and that's simply because of the risk that some of these industries may have, and with illegal persecution, for example, whether that's targeted or non-targeted, like I said, that is something that we've focused on hugely in our research. And in Wales, we're quite lucky not to have a heavy shooting industry. And so, sometimes these particular incidents, you know, like the Isle of Wight birds attached in Suffolk and Dorset, you know, they do have high presence of game shooting industry. So, like I said, we have increased our efforts in southwest England as well to work with similar key interest groups. But certainly in the Welsh landscape, that land use is different, and we can, you know, suggest that it's not going to be a huge problem in regards to the level is happening in Scotland and England. But like I said, we aren't gullible to the fact that there are species that are targeted, particularly in the winter here in Wales, like foxes, which could then present a risk to white-tailed eagles as scavengers. But it is all about working with key interest groups to make them aware that, like I said, because of our birds are going to be satellite tags, it's going to be the most monitored bird population in Wales, and that sometimes keeps people at bay. Sometimes.
Thanks, Sophie. Jacob has asked a question, and I think it's a really interesting question. Will there be opportunities to volunteer with the reintroduction program?
Certainly. I mean, if, for example, you know, our work is at the moment is to, you know, is focused on ecological and social work. When we submit our license, like I said, we're hoping to do that within the next year. When we submit our license, we're then turning to obviously infrastructure, because it's going to take a year for that license to be considered by NRW, we've been told. So we're then in a phase where, like I said, we would continue with public engagement, but also build infrastructure. And post-release, we almost certainly would need volunteers to help monitor the birds as well. So yes, I would suggest to keep an eye out on Eagle Reintroduction Wales website or social media accounts, yeah, in the upcoming year to see if there's any opportunities available.
That's great. And in the longer run, I suppose, Sophie, what you'll be looking for is records. If people see one of your eagles, to report it so that you can track how they're doing and where they're going.
Yes,
I know that's
yeah.
been a real priority for the reintroductions in the south of England. So fantastic. Okay. We had a 2-hour window for this, but we deliberately put 2 hours in. So when it ended up as being an hour, everyone would think they got an hour of their life back. But it has been an absolutely fantastically interesting. Lauren, have you got further questions?
Yeah, just a couple more. So we've got one from Helen. So thanks, Helen. So Helen says bird flu is affecting seabirds at the moment in certain locations. Would this have an impact on the introduction of the white-tailed eagle?
Yes, I'm glad you brought avian flu up. Well, avian flu, like I said, has been a really hard one, really, to watch, hasn't it, over the last three years in particular, or 2 years. And we have definitely got avian flu on our brain at all times, and we know that it has impacted previous reintroduction efforts of white-tailed seagulls and ospreys, because obviously white-tailed eagles do or can eat a lot of seabirds, which biomagnification, like I said, they are considered as a risk species. Luckily enough, we haven't found too many white-tailed seagulls affected across the UK, touch wood, particularly in the Isle of Wight. Scotland a few, and Ireland a few as well, but only a handful. So it hasn't been huge impact, but also with the reintroduction efforts, you know, if it would be a high avian influenza year, we wouldn't be issued a license. So that happened on the Isle of Wight last year, where, for example, our authority figures have a duty to safeguard, and obviously we wouldn't be comfortable to be releasing young birds in a high risk environment. So we have these and we're monitoring it, like I said, not year by year, but kind of at the minute, week by week, in regards to this. And we've got 3 vets working on this. We've got a vet in Jersey, a vet at WWT, and a vet locally in Wales, all, you know, kind of putting their heads together to put in, like I said, the plan and disease management that we need. And we found recently that it's now it can be multi-host. So it's an interesting one, but definitely something that we are considering at all levels.
Thank you, Sophie. That's excellent. And back to you, Lauren.
Excellent. Thanks, Sophie. So another question in from Emily. So is there a particular tree species that they favour as a breeding habitat? And can you use artificial nesting sites like they've done, for example, for the ospreys in North Wales?
Yes, so with tree species, like I said, white-tailed eagles are great. There's no species preference. So they can breed in both conifer and deciduous as long as there's large primary branches that they would be able to build a nest on. So nesting preferences, like I said, not no preference at all. And it's the same with youngsters, actually. They both use broad-leaved and conifer plantations. So they usually classed as edge species of forests or woodlands. So no, across Europe, we have not found one particular species that they kind of, you know, are attracted to. And with artificial nests, yes, we can, but not to the level of ospreys. So for example, in ospreys, we can just erect a nest in the middle of or use a nice little platform. For white-tailed eagles, they would be very similar nests, but they're much bigger and would have to be supported by a natural tree. So we would be able to erect nests, but, you know, we'd have to use trees rather than platforms.
Thank you, Sophie. any more, Lauren, or
No,
is that?
I think that's it really. Sort of, I had one general question really, but I think to be honest, it's been covered by your amazing presentation and through the questions here. But it was just what the kind of impact is really on the local biodiversity. So I think, I said we sort of covered that really. But if there was anything else you wanted to sort of conclude with, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, that's like I said, it's with the impact on biodiversity, because it's like I said, because white-tailed eagles are such a generalist species, and across Europe they showcase, like I said, seasonal and spatial correlation with taking the most seasonally abundant prey, and they're able to switch between water birds and fish and vice versa. Like I said, we don't feel like they would present any given or high risk to any given protected species. If we were talking about a specialist species like a golden eagles, which would just constantly take one or two or three species, then I think we'd be in trouble. But because white-tailed eagles, like I said, have such a wide scope, I think they're, like I said, a species which would provide benefits rather than the negative influences.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, colleagues, that has been an absolutely wonderful hour, which has been really packed full of information and I have to say hope as well for the future. Sophie, I'm ever so grateful for you for coming along in the evening and providing us with this.